Hi, welcome. Thanks for attending the talk today. This is my conversation, discussion and presentation with you on building cross-platform desktop apps with Dataverse and .NET MAUI. I'm Carl Cookson. I work as the Head of Professional Services at a Dynamics and Power Platform consultancy called Power 365 in the UK. Microsoft MVP in business applications for the last 4 years. The agenda for today, just three very simple steps. What is .NET MAUI? Why we should be using .NET MAUI and against the Power Platform, because I know you're all here for a Power Platform conference, and showing you a different tool set might be a bit strange. But yeah, understanding when you would want to use .NET MAUI and the use case behind it. And then I'll go into a demo about how we can get the access to Dataverse, to the Power Platform, via the .NET MAUI and build these very powerful, very bespoke applications for your users and your businesses. So, first off, what is .NET MAUI? MAUI stands for Multi-Platform Application User Interface. This is a .NET C# codebase that is a single project, single codebase. By that, what I mean is that the interactions, the framework that Microsoft provides allows one single project to create 4 different and 5 with ties and different versions applications from the WinUI, which is that logo on the left of the screen there, macOS, iOS, and Android. So you can have one base application, which you can then create apps in those Play stores, those environments ready for your users to use. And what separates MAUI apart from the others is actually using the default controls, the macOS version, using the macOS default controls. And it does this by using the .NET for macOS toolbase and creates that. And the same when it goes to Android. So your users are getting an interface which looks like a native app. Which is very difficult, not impossible. I'm sure Scott and other fantastic people that do Power Platforming day in, day out can create these apps, but it's a slightly different variation on that. And how does it do that? Well, firstly, it takes your app code and it translates it via this abstraction layer. If you're going into WinUI 3, which is the Windows as we know it now, Windows 11, it goes directly into that port. Others, it translates it into the .NET for Android, iOS, and Mac Catalyst runtimes and core components, and binding those controls to that layer, and basically converts your code into something that will understand and into that pure .NET 4 layer. It's then associating that with the .NET runtimes and libraries and creating versions of that across Android, iOS, etc. Now, and that's what we're showing with the pattern from 1 to 3 in this diagram. For the pattern 2, it doesn't stop you because you have got access to .NET for Android. So if there is something specific that is not available in .NET MAUI, you can get to it. You can get to those core .NET runtimes for Android, for iOS, etc. So you can leverage those new and exciting features that are coming out for those platforms. And this is the slight variance in what we're seeing here is that Microsoft are building that abstraction layer off the base. So if the base changes, we have to allow Microsoft time to create that abstraction layer and put that on top of that layer as well, as you can see it. But why would you use it though? Because we're all here as Power Platform people, Power Apps people. It really is, the reason is when you reach the limits of Power Apps. Power Apps is great in a lot of scenarios, but it has its limits, and those can be something that are a negative for you if you're building these complex applications, complexity being a key there. If you're building something that needs a lot of logic, it needs to use the applications on the phone or needs to look exactly and feel like a common app, that's where you want to start thinking about .NET MAUI. But it's also a design decision. There's no conversion path from a Power App to any further application path. So It's a design decision you're making with your customers, with your client base, or your company as you're building these apps out. If your requirements meet those sort of things along the line, because there's nothing worse than having a slow, unperformant app that you tried your best to resolve and have to, after six or 8 months, switch to .NET MAUI or any other environment. So think about the limitations and do that architectural design to understand why you're choosing Power Apps as your solution and why not choose a different solution to meet those needs. It's also, if you've got an existing code base, .NET MAUI has been brought out from the Xamarin code base. So if you've got those schools already, then it's an easy switch over. So it might be that you've got a dev team that allows you to do that. Like I keep saying, allowing your native field app is a must if that's what your users are expecting. They're expecting an app that looks like an iOS app. They're expecting it in the Play Store, etc., and it needs to look exactly and feel exactly like that app. Then this is where you might want to consider it. Another feature that is applicable is if you don't need a Power Platform license. Don't shoot me, but sometimes you want to create an app that is exposed to external users and going via an API call. So you don't need a domain user at that point. And you're creating apps that are combining Dataverse data with other things, and therefore you're doing the control and that registration as an external user. But you can create an app around that using an API call to either an API managed environment and doing it that way, or using a client secret so that you don't have to manage that user. Some examples of, and these are all taken from the .NET conference that happened in November. So, and one of the links that I've sent through, and I'll share it to you at the end, is the videos of where Microsoft was showing off some of the great apps that organizations have made for their users. And this is just showing off the power of the .NET MAUI suite. So this is an investment app that Fidelity have done. Very complex, very technical in detail, and lots of things going on. The idea of remaking this into a Power App would be, you would struggle, and therefore it's something that we want to switch over to a different framework. This is a macOS and a Windows app, and it looks the same across both. So that was very important to Fidelity. FinLocker, creating mobile application, and it does have a look and feel that you could probably do within a Power App, but this is an external app. So this is for their customers to go through a step about getting a mortgage, getting a financial advice from them. So they're building this up into something that eventually feeds their CRM and their lead generation system, but obviously is not tied down to that, and we're not creating that information, but it's creating that app around it as we go. Civica, so they've built this leave question and then built out a whole HR profile against it and created it as an app. But that app they've spread across both their Android and their iOS estate and their internal desktop estate. GE Digital, again, something that you could probably be familiar with when we're getting into the Power App space. But there's a lot of complexity there, lots of menus, lots of structure, and it looks like a normal desktop application. There's something that they've done there to do that. And finally, we've got the Cincinnati Children's Hospital. Forgive me. They wanted an app that helped their patients to be able to understand where they're going, what they're doing. So they're using the device quite significantly by taking photos and overlaying data onto them, taking the video feed and using the GPS coordinators and overloading that. Something that is probably not possible. I'm probably saying probably because somebody will prove me wrong. In the Power App Suite, and again, it's externals, but it's still using the data that's in their CRM systems and is available to everything they do. So I'm going to swap over now, and it's really demo time. So what I'm going to do is show you the app that I created as a way forward, and what this is doing is logging into Dataverse, and you can probably see a very familiar prompt here. This is showing you that sign in. So this is doing that authentication. I'm just going to click it because I've already authenticated. And once that's authenticated, I'm getting a list of information from a Dataverse environment. If you've used a sample application around reserving technology within Dataverse, this is feeding off that data. So I've got an application here, very much accessible, very much aligned to your view mode. I can even do the dark mode. And this is building up on controls that are standard and look and feel that is standard. If I click into a reservation here, we're using the standard controls for selecting dates. This is the standard control that Microsoft provides within WinUI, so something that people are used to doing. And the same with the selection, it's allowing those things to happen. And if I hit save here, you can also see that we get, oh no, it'll be on the wrong screen now, a notification. So using the notifications within Windows to tell you that something has occurred, which is updating that record that you've got there. Okay, so that's a very simple application, something that very much looks like you could do it within a Power App. But this is where we start to get in between. So what I'm going to do now is stop this application and start up, and it takes a while, so we'll move on, the Android version. So if you're using .NET MAUI on a Windows environment like I am, you can do emulators for Android to show it for you on there. Be wary that if you've got a laptop like I have for work that is one of the new ones with the Snapdragon processors, it doesn't work. So just learn your limitations. And while that's building and loading, I'm just going to show you what I'm doing in the code. This is the MAUI program. So the MAUI program, the first thing it runs is this C# file, which is going to create the information that's going on and doing for you. The C# program is loading a load of services and pages into its environment. And one of those pages that we're going to load when we do this register services down here is this MAUI app builder. It is this Dataverse service. And what I'm doing here is creating a new Dataverse service and calling the get token function. So when you're connecting to any Power Platform environment, you can do it via the HTTP Web API, which is what I'm doing in here, because I'm mimicking the logic I did for a work project. Or you can use the Power Platform .NET framework that allows you to do the same. Very, very similar in approach. You need to get an authentication, and then once you're calling those APIs, you're passing that as a token, the token being a string that you get once it's been authorized. So when we did the initial load of the Windows app, it prompted me in my browser. That's it getting understanding, is it allowed to connect? I'm going in as that user, which is great for if you're doing something that's an extension of your Dataverse and is a customer an internal facing organizational application. So if I go into the get token method, we then go into this login as an async method, and this is effectively doing a look into the cache originally, which is this get accounts async call, which is effectively saying, do I already know about the user and his access to the environment that I'm accessing to get hold of? And this is effectively, any browser does a better job than you can do about caching credentials. The same in the phone, it's caching those credentials for you. And if I don't have to do anything, if I already know about what that connection is, all it's going to do is decide to use that. If that doesn't work here in this getting the token silently, and if it fails, then we need to then go back the other way and start thinking about how do we get it interactively. So silently it says, well, I've already got one, I've got that cached, it's not past its best before date effectively, it's still valid, I'll try and see if I can use that token, and it does that, and it goes to the endpoint and acquires that token from Microsoft on their API endpoint. If I need to go through the interactive route, which is that pop-up on Windows, and it's the same within in Android, it will pop a browser up and expect you to log in like you normally would within the Power Platform and Dynamics, with your password, your two-factor authentication, etc. It will do that interactively, which is this call here. Now you can see that we've got a bit of platform-specific code here. So if it's the Android version, it's expecting a different parameter, and it's expecting a different parameter about this current activity. So we're passing that in. We're also executing with that method asynchronously and expecting something back. Again, if it's Android, we have to wait for the platform activity to happen before we return the result. And the result, if we're okay to authenticate, will include that token. So if I go back to my Dataverse service, into my get token there, we then get this access token, which we can see as the variable we need to pass every time. We can then configure the headers within this Dataverse service with all this information that we need, with the bearer as the access token. We basically define what we want back here. We always want JSON back, because when we're calling that API, that's what we're expecting. And then we're good to go, really. What I'm doing extra to this is defining a list of products. So when we did that selection of what they wanted to return, that's a list of products that doesn't change at all within the lifetime of the application. So we go and get that at the beginning of the lifetime of the application and show me that list so that I can display it as a list. So if I go and look at this call here, we've got initialized products call, which is then calling our favorite fetch XML. So if you've not used fetch XML in the Dataverse environment, this is a way of creating queries and creating logic to do filters and decide what queries you want to do for your application. And this is really key if you want to reduce the amount of data that's returned, and really quite useful. And that applies not only to when you're doing code like this, but into other things like when you're in your calls in Power Automate, etc., in flow calls, you can use the fetch XML to limit exactly what you want to see, do lots of inner joins, and get a data set that you're interested in. For me, it's quite simple at the moment. It's just going to get me a list of products. And then because I'm getting JSON back, because of the property I've just said, what I need to do after I've received that data is deserialize that object, and deserialize that object into something that I want to know about. So I have a class called products, and each product will have a series of properties of all the things that I care about in my product information. So the product images I care about. Okay, so what we've done, we've got a list of products, we've proved that our service is connected, and we're done. So if I go back to the program manager now, we add that service as a Dataverse service, as a singleton, where we're only going to need one of those. We only ever need one Dataverse service connection. Ideally, you might have more, I guess, but in your application, but effectively that's the one that we want to know about, and we're only adding one of those rather than creating it every time, which is the add transient there. And we're turning that back to the app builder. What the app builder does at that point, it goes and gets the main page that is defined within the main page XML, XAML back of the view page, and this is where we're doing some checking. So once we've initialized the information and we've navigated to that page, we do a check token, and this is just a clause really to not show you anything until that token is available. because we're working in an asynchronous mode, the idea of going to get that data and bring it back is all well and good. But what if that's not ready? What if we haven't got that information? So this is me just basically waiting in this check token method for the method if the check token is there, we're all good to go, and it will just effectively stay on that loading screen until we've done that approval, until we've got that token, as in we've authenticated either silently or unsilently. And then what we're doing with these methods now is pushing to the navigation a new reservation list view. So if I look at the reservation list view, and maybe a bit of a segue now and back to our presentation, we've got to understand MVVM is what it's called. MVVM, standing for Model View Model, is a community toolkit effectively generated method of allowing an abstraction from the model, the data, the bit in the middle, which is doing your business logic, and the view, and in our case that's the page. So as you can see from this, we've got a view model in the middle, which is effectively doing the hard work, but we're abstracting that from the view. So the idea is that you could have multiple versions of that page using the same view model because it wants to see the same logic, but that view, the page could be very different. So you could have a totally different page for Android as you would do Windows if you needed that separation of functionality. But your view model would stay the same. There'd still be a save button which would call the same logic within that view model. So on the page, you have data bindings that are going back to that view model to allow you to do that. And that view model, once that data binding property changes, will send a notification over to the page to change the display of that. And that's why you've got that. There's no need in this logic to go and refresh that value in that page to display it. It just keeps it refreshed because you've set these things up. The view model updates the model, and in this case, it's just those. The model tends to be class definitions, and we are effectively using that to then go and update Dataverse or things like that. And again, once you've done that, you could send a notification back to refresh that data. So they are all in sync, and you're keeping a class version of that. So if you're updating a value within that class, it would synchronize through to update the view model, which would update the view. But there is that separation. And while we're here in the presentation, there's lots of other helpers that are in this. There's a .NET MAUI community toolkit, which I'm using to do a lot of the reusable elements, including animations, behavior. So there's no need to rewrite the wheel. These guys have already done all the hard work and are better developers than I. So make use of that. And it really is coming on strong, that community toolkit, in terms of what's available. And that is supported across the board. So they have done helpers from all the platforms. And that's open source. It's available on GitHub. Contributions are coming from everywhere. There is a couple of custodians of that, which will build up that logic. And on like that, we just found the community toolkit MVVM, which is more generic. There is lots of different ways of creating apps using that MVVM methodology that's used in other ways of creating apps and other logic. So that's a standard one that's creating that pattern. That's where I'm going to start using that observable behavior so that I don't need to do any work. We're going to go to this reservation list view. So what that is a view, a page, which is in XAML, cross-platform application markup language. I can't remember what the X stands for. It's gone off the top of my head. And this is where you're establishing your base. This is where you're establishing your page lookout and feel. You can see from this, we have got definitions of a grid, definitions of the columns in that grid. which define the information that's displayed in the reservation list view as we were going down. It's telling me what heights they are, whether it's as much height as it can, or a minimum height or a set height, and the same with the columns. And as we go down this, we can see that we're populating in a specific column, in a specific row, information. So this is spanning both rows that I set up. So this is the little image of the reserver, the person that's going to take the thing away. And we're basically setting that up. So it's very much, it is XAML, so it is XML, information that is in a formatted way, in a structure. Very much if you looked at the underlying properties of a Power App page, it's all there in JSON, I believe, nowadays, but allowing you to effectively get that information and set it up. If we looked at that, there is a hot, I'm in the Android version, so I can't do the hot binding. So you could work with this as you're going on the fly. So any changes you make are reflected in the Windows application, which is great for building these things out. It's not quite as intuitive as the Power Apps developer experience, but it's very close. It's very good. And you're seeing an awful lot of things that are effectively giving you that level of detail and that level of complexity that you don't get in a Power Platform. And if you can see at the top here as well, we've got these swipe recognizers and a refresh view in here. So there's a refresh here and a swipe. So something that is not in the Windows application, but is there for and is available in other applications. So context, because it's not applicable in Windows, it doesn't work. But if we've now got the refresh, we can do that within the mobile application. Let me just get my notes just to remind myself. So once we've got this page and we've established where its view model is, which is established, and I can't find it now, established at the top, we can then start to look at what we're doing with the view model itself. If I go to the view model, you can see that we've got an established of a service, and it's connected to that Dataverse service that we established. And once we load this view model in, we do a refresh collection. The refresh collection call is, again, shout out to Mark Carrington here for his SQL for your CDS, because I'm a SQL man. I'm quite old school. I understand it a lot more than I do fetch XML. So I use that quite frequently to try and get a query out that I understand. And he's got a tool that will generate that fetch XML for you in the XVM toolbox. So this code here is effectively going to get the information that I need to show that reservations list. First of all, there is a filter here to showing only the active reservations. So if anything that gets returned, I don't show it. And we've also got a linked entity, which means that I'm going off to the product table to go and get the product name and the product ID, and making sure that we've got the information we need to display that product in the listing. So very much saying, these are the only bits I want. I'm not going to get any more back. And we do the same as we did before. We go and get that information. We're using the data service, which has got that authentication, so we don't have to do that again. And then we go and get that information and return it and deserialize that logic. We clear a collection, and then we basically add for everything that's returned. We get an individual item and add it to that collection. Now that collection is up here at the top, and you'll see that these observable properties. So this means this is where coming from the MVVM Community Toolkit MVVM, and this means what it's done, the toolkit has done, is wrapped around a whole bunch of code to allow this to be observable. It's basically got a property there that it knows about, and as you update it, it's calling the backend things that need to be called to do that change. This is very much a wrapper around these logics that I don't know enough about to be, and you could code it on yourself. Don't get me wrong, you can do these things yourself, but that toolkit is getting it provided for you, and it's doing it for you. So this is very much a key process to that. And the same with this is an observable collection. So that basically says that I've got a collection, a list that I know will change, and every time I change, it changes. You need to tell the front end, and this is what's happening here. And then finally, this is another one that I'll show you in a minute what it's doing. But that's basically when it's refreshing. You'll see it's another property that we're just logging onto, and because we within the refresh code, we call that false. Okay, so we've set that up. We've refreshed our collection. We've got a collection that's populated. And we can go back to the XAML, and we can then see how that's XAML. We've now got this collection view, which is binded to the reservations column. So everything that we've set up, as it's added, it will get added to this collection and get rendered as appropriate. And then each of the items, like we've just gone through, will then get this information through. Another thing here to notice is that what we're saying about this tap gesture. So this tap gesture here is only for mobile applications, but it works as a click in effect on a Windows application, and you're passing a command, and this command is effectively going back to that view model and doing whatever the code behind that view model does. And if you see that here, the tap command, because we're using this relay command tag and using the MVVM toolkit, that will create the public version of that, which has got the tap command, the suffix of command onto that property. And all we're doing here is doing the navigating to the detail view that we saw right at the beginning of this presentation. Okay, so let me show you, going back to our Android emulator, well, going back and showing you the Android app. As you can see here, we've got the same application, the same information. We're logged in already, so we know what we're doing. But because I'm in Android, I can do a few different things. I can do the swipe gestures, so I can return that straight away. And it'll run the code, and I'll get this little notification here, and I'm done. I can then click it. I can do the collected straight away. The same logic applies. It'll go and update it and update it the collected state. So very much things that people are expecting now within mobile applications and expecting to be able to do. We've got a pull down to refresh. So exactly the same logic. You're refreshing that list by something that they're just people just expect these things to be there. If I click into the reservation itself, you can see we're into the same form. Slightly different here because the Android's got a limitation about images within the status, the checkbox columns. So slightly different format, and you have to work around some of these intricacies. But we're using the Android default interfaces for dates, using the Android default interfaces for selections. So very much what people are expecting to see. Okay, and if we hit save there, we go back, and then again we get that prompt. We get a notification that something's happened. If I go into that detail view here, once we've navigated to it, we've got a different XAML here. So it's a different XAML file, which has a different view and a different view model. The XAML has a different layout, and here you can see that I'm using these SyncFusion free controls that are available, community-based controls that are doing things that are standard and trying to get a standard across a lot of these MAUI apps. But we're putting these dates in, we've got the return by into a grid, we're doing selection of the products, and we're all good to go. And this is binding to properties within the view model. This is a reservation that's got a start date. There is a reservation start. We're doing the binding at the top. And if we go to that view model itself, you can see that's what we're doing here. So if we go and have a look at the save command, which is something that we'd be interested in as pushing data back to Dataverse, we create a new sample reservation. Sample reservation is the table name, because it's coming out of that sample app. It's slightly different than the one that gets retrieved when we load, because we don't have that expansion. We don't need to know about all of those things. So all I'm doing here is copying and pasting the information from one to the other. I then serialize that object to a JSON object, which means I can pass it into my Dataverse service. And what I'm doing is patching that table with the reservation ID, so I know what that is. I don't get a duplicate record because I'm passing that in, and that JSON. So in that patch async method function, we get very much a simple call to the HTTP client, send async information. With that information, that security that we've already done, that token that we've already used, and we get to a point where we're sending it. And if we get back a success, then we return, or not, we throw an exception. So very much standard use of the HTTP client here, rather than anything else. And then very simply, once that's done, we make a toast, which is using the community toolkit, like it's so there, to show you that little pop-up, that little bit of information that's showing you exactly what's happened, and giving you that feedback that something's happened. So yeah, very simply, we've now got an app that we can start using across 2 different devices like I've got here. We could deploy to macOS and iOS if I had those devices to hand. You can't do the debugging on your PC. You have to use a device. But you can see how we can build up these applications that are very much the way that people are expecting to use applications. They look like and feel like a custom application, but we're using the same code set, and that's the beauty of .NET MAUI. So really, for me, this is now a call to action. These should be links we'll make available within the chat. But give it a go is the first one. Build your first app. There's a whole learning series around building apps on Microsoft Learn, and the link will be in the show notes. Just go through the steps by steps. It's got a great with the .NET 9 that came out recently. It's got a great new template that starts off with a lot of these. It includes the Sync Fusion components. It sets you up ready to go with your navigation, with all the bits that you need, and really is very useful. And there's a series on YouTube that backs that up, .NET MAUI for Beginners, which will take you through step by step by step. The next one is there's a GitHub link here, which is awesome.NET MAUI. That's a great resource for anything and everything you need to know about .NET MAUI, how it's doing, what's happening what's the next latest and greatest thing. Really is a great resource of beginner to professional, for people who want to build apps like this. I've already mentioned about those apps that I showed you earlier right at the beginning, but the .NET Conference 2024, which was in November, that series of videos around what's coming and what the latest and greatest, they showed off some of these applications, and there's some great discussion around what's coming. And they have really gone a long way of bringing this to the forefront now in their cross-application development frameworks. And then learning how to interact with Dataverse. So using the .NET Core SDK in the Learn will allow you to do that. So using that over than just the direct web API, there's also the web API that's available. And both those are something that it depends on your choice. Like I said earlier, the reason why I'm using the .web API, because the original makeup of this app was using a custom API that we built based in Azure with the API management, but we were combining data sets from 3 or 4 different sources to get that API into that mobile application. And with that, I think I'm done. But thank you very much for your time today. Thanks for listening and watching. Make sure you see the rest of the sessions and get involved in that hack together. Looking forward to seeing your solutions on that hack. Thank you very much for your time.